The federal government comes under fire over its safeguard mechanism, but there's movement on the voice referendum. One of the country's biggest investors pulls back from office towers and some retail properties. And Bill Gates reckons OpenAI's language generation artificial intelligence tool is one of the greatest technology breakthroughs ever. It's Thursday, the 23rd of March, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have an interview today with John Stensholt, who has appeared on the show a number of times now, and he's making pretty much his annual appearance to talk about The List, Australia's richest 250.
Yes, it is the list of the richest Australians. Clearly, guess who comes in at number one? Gina Rinehart once again, followed by Andrew Forrest. But it's a really fascinating chat. We talk quite a bit about Harry Triguboff and the quirks of the man, shall we say. Harry Triguboff, of course, owns Meriton. We talk about what's happening in different sectors, how manufacturers are making a comeback, whereas the tech guys are going the wrong way. Anyway, I love Australia's richest 250. John Stensholt, no one more capable to put it together than John.
Yeah, and I just like him telling you about what happens when he actually calls up these billionaires to actually confirm their wealth and the conversations that they have, either to confirm or deny or just to nudge towards the correct number. Yes. It's really a fascinating interview. It's a great one to stick around for. The main story this morning, though, Sean, the federal government's safeguard mechanism legislation is in doubt with fierce opposition from the Greens, the Coalition and the business community as well.
If implemented, the mechanism will mandate emissions reductions for the country's 215 biggest carbon emitters. But yesterday, Greens leader Adam Bandt said the flaw in Labor's safeguard mechanism scheme is that pollution can still increase, mostly because new coal and gas mines are allowed to open. He also doesn't like the fact that under the legislation, big emitters can buy offsets. Now, clearly, there's room for negotiation on this one with the Greens. Fortescue Metals' Andrew Forrest also disagrees with allowing polluting companies to buy unlimited carbon credits, yesterday saying it doesn't do enough to reduce pollution. The safeguard mechanism has caused something of a schism in the Greens, with former party leader Bob Brown yesterday resigning from the aligned Australian Conservation Foundation after the foundation urged the political party to pass Labor's safeguard mechanism reforms. Tasmanian Greens Senator Nick McKim then accused the foundation of being captured by Labor. This is all happening as Adam Bandt is trying to negotiate some sort of deal. For its part, the government said Australia's 43% emissions reduction target won't be met if the bill isn't passed. Still a long way to go before it gets to that point, though.
Sean, there is plenty going on in Canberra. Clearly, Labor and the Coalition have reached a deal to overhaul laws on the conduct of referendums, effectively sidelining the Greens and the Senate crossbench.
Ground was given on both sides in terms of the voice referendum, at least. Labor agreed to publish an official pamphlet as part of the lead up to the national vote, expected around October, while the Coalition gave up its demands for equal funding for official yes and no campaigns. Yesterday, the government's expert working group held its final meeting ahead of presenting draft constitutional changes and a draft question to the government. Now, that'll be considered by Cabinet before being introduced into Parliament next week. That's when the Federal Liberal Party is expected to decide its final position.
Also yesterday, Sean, the federal opposition attempted to introduce a private member's bill in Parliament to ban the display of Nazi symbolism.
Under the bill, the display of a Nazi symbol or action commonly associated with a Nazi party would be banned unless there's a reasonable excuse, such as a museum display or educational purposes. Now, penalties would range from fines to a year in prison. Bans would extend to the swastika, the Nazi salute, the Nazi uniform, and other types of symbols identified in the Executive Council of Australian Jury Anti-Semitism reports. Now, Labor blocked the move yesterday, but Leader of the House, Tony Burke, agreed with the sentiment of the bill. He just said that the government needs to follow process, which includes drafting legislation of its own and putting it through Cabinet and other party processes. It will now be under pressure to do so. Of course, this follows an anti-transgender rally on the weekend in Melbourne, attended by neo-Nazis who performed the Nazi salute. The point of all this is it is very likely that we will end up seeing legislation that bans Nazi symbolism.
Yeah, it's a tough one there for the government, isn't it? Because they wouldn't want to be seen to be blocking that. But then, as you say, the important thing is that they then do actually follow up with some action of their own.
Yeah, and I think they will.
Yeah. And finally, Sean, one more. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been invited to the G7 summit in May in Japan.
Yes, so Australia isn't in the G7, but Albanese has been invited to attend the Leaders Summit outreach meetings. We weren't invited last year in Germany. In fact, we were sort of snubbed following French outrage over abandoning the deal to buy submarines from that country. France, of course, is part of the G7, and they pressured Germany, presumably, to not invite us. Anyway, we're back.
That all feels like it's a long way behind us now, doesn't it?
It does. It seems a long time ago.
Now, how did the ASX perform yesterday, Sean?
The S&P ASX 200 finished up nearly 1% to 7,016 points. Plenty of good performers. Aristocrat Leisure, QBE Insurance, WiseTech Global and Woolworths all did well. The oil and gas stocks jumped after the price of crude rebounded. There's basically a little less fretting about a global slowdown, Michael. That helped Woodside and Beach Energy. They were both up about 5%. Santos rose more than 3%. Coal miners outperformed. New Hope led the way, jumped nearly 5%. But the gold miners, who have been on a bit of a tear, well, they fell back. The not-so-well-named Silver Lake Resources. Michael, this one's for you.
Oh, this has been one of my bugbears for a very long time. You cannot name a gold miner Silver Lake Resources. That's very misleading, Sean.
Yeah, very misleading. Anyway, Silver Lake Resources, which of course is a gold company, was the worst on the bourse yesterday, down 5.6%. The next four laggards were also gold companies. Sector leader Newcrest dropped by about 1.4%. Some of the bank stocks did well yesterday, particularly the regional banks that followed an improvement on Wall Street. So Suncorp, Bendigo and Adelaide, they all did pretty well. And just finally, I'll mention Latitude. Now, its share price tumbled 7% yesterday after it said it's found further evidence of large-scale information theft in last week's cyber attack. The theft affects both applicants and new and past customers from Australia and New Zealand.
There's been so much activity, Sean, in the last couple of weeks now in international markets. What's happened in the last 24 hours?
Well, things are just a little bit less crazy is probably best way to describe it. Calming global markets yesterday morning were comments from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She said that the US government will intervene to protect depositors where necessary, just like it did with the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. That helped Wall Street higher yesterday, at least. Now, as I mentioned, oil and gas and coal prices have all risen over the past 24 hours or so. Gold's fallen, hence the move in all those share prices. The Aussie dollar, Michael, is fetching around 67 US cents. And finally, a little tail here. It's an interesting story on Bloomberg. JP Morgan, one of the big financial firms in the US, bought $2 million worth of nickel from the London Metals Exchange, and it turned out to be just stones. Not nickel, just stones.
I'm sorry. Sorry, what?
So $2 million worth of nickel, they opened the bags, turned out to be stones. Now, the London Metals Exchange last week announced it had cancelled 9 nickel contracts after discovering irregularities at a certain warehouse, i.e. no nickel.
Oh.
Why it's really surprising is the London Metals Exchange is kind of the grand poobah of metals exchanges, and their contracts are generally never questioned. But as it turns out, JP Morgan managed to spend $2 million on stones.
That is the great nickel swindle. That is just fantastic.
It is a great story.
And I also enjoy your description of the London Metals Exchange as being the grand poobah of metal exchanges.
Oh, yes.
Is there a lot of competition in that category to see who's going to be the grand poobah?
There'd probably be a few poobahs. There'd be a few metal exchanges, but no grand poobah like London Metals Exchange.
Well, I'm glad we've managed to settle that one, Sean. You really surprised me there with that nickel story.
I find when I work with you, Michael, just occasionally you just have to say something a little bit left of centre to keep your interest there.
just to make sure I'm still listening. Still here,
That's
Sean.
right.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Australia may be through the COVID pandemic at best next year. It doesn't mean it'll go away, though, but it will just be like a seasonal flu kind of thing.
Yes, a bit like the Spanish flu 100 years ago. It eventually became a weaker winter disease, so too will COVID-19. That's according to one of the experts in the area, Professor James Wood, an infectious disease modeller from the School of Population Health at the University of New South Wales. In a story in the Financial Review, Professor Wood says the first wave of 2023 is already underway, driven by new subvariants of Omicron that are a little more transmissible. But eventually infections will drop to very low levels following a wave, as happens with the flu, and that's likely to occur next year. Now, he did warn that there's always a chance of the unexpected turning up. We saw that with Omicron turning up 16 months ago. It's lasted longer than we think, but all in all, 2024 is a year that we can say the end of the COVID crisis.
That is actually really good news.
It is good news. It's great news.
Oh, fantastic. Now, Sean, the owner of Kathmandu and Rip Curl, KMD Brands, has recorded a jump in profit and a big jump in sales. You've talked before about being a big fan of Kathmandu, which just, it strikes me as odd because you don't really strike me as a hiker.
Oh, really? Oh, big hiker, Michael.
No, but you burn so easily. You strike me as someone who sunburns very, very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Use a lot of sunscreen. In fact, my backpack mostly is weighed down by sunscreen.
You have one of those, what is it, a camelback or whatever,
Yes.
camelback or whatever it is, and instead of water, it's just full of kind of SPF 50.
Yeah, basically. No, I like Kathmandu. Kathmandu is the sort of store you shop in and it makes you feel younger. Now, maybe not for a 20-year-old, but a mid-50 guy going to Kathmandu, you think, yeah, I think I can climb that mountain. I might buy those boots.
Bunnings is the same for me, but shopping there makes me feel handy. And then I get kind of home and realize that I've got no idea how to use anything that I've just bought.
So buying food at a sushi train, that makes me feel good because it's not KFC or it's not McDonald's and I feel that I'm being healthier.
So basically we can put all of these shops, Kathmandu, Bunnings and say Sushi Train, all into a single basket of shops that make us feel better.
Well, actually, now I did once interview the former CEO of JB Hi-Fi, Richard Murray, and just saying, I walk in a JB Hi-Fi and there's lots of music and there's yellow everywhere and everyone serving me is a lot younger, definitely a lot more tattoos, a lot more piercings than me, but I just kind of like the feel of it because I'm this old bloke in a young environment. And he basically said, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Get old blokes like, well, he didn't quite say in this many words, get old blokes like you buying more because you feel younger.
Something's just a little bit creepy about all of this. I don't know quite what it is. It's just Sean hanging around JB Hi-Fi just to feel young, to be surrounded by young people. Just a little bit sinister.
I don't think that many people would think that was sinister except for you. I would have just called it good marketing to old blokes like me. You think it's sinister?
Yeah, slightly sinister, but I'm sure no one else has picked that out.
Let me tell you about Kathmandu. The outdoor and sports company is benefiting from tourism returning, particularly places like Queensland and Hawaii. So Australian airport store sales are now above pre-COVID levels. The chief executive, Michael Daly, was cautious about the outlook. He said future sales of the two brands, along with the US boost company Oboz, are uncertain because of rising interest rates.
Sean, I mentioned this one at the top of the show. One of the country's biggest investors has been pulling back from office towers and retail real estate, preferring logistics, medical offices and storage infrastructure.
Yeah, so Australian Retirement Trust is the second largest super fund, the outcome of the merger of Sun Super and Q Super. Its chief investment officer, Ian Patrick, said the fund, post-COVID, is more wary of investing in office towers and retail properties and has cut its holdings of such assets by about 20%. Now, it really highlights a difficult time for office tower landlords, particularly if they're highly leveraged and they have to revalue their holdings. Anecdotally, some big property owners have received offers something about 15% below what they've got in their books. Now, many loans are taken out against the value of these properties, so a 15% devaluation really matters. What is continuing to perform well is logistics and industrial property and storage. Storage has become very popular at the moment. The reason people like storage or investors like storage is most people pay rent every month, which means you can up it with inflation. Also, businesses tend to take out a lot of the storage space and they're fairly reliable payers. There you go.
Well, that's something. Sean, ABC has been hit by its first worker strikes in 17 years, with community and public sector union members stopping work for 1 hour yesterday morning and for another hour yesterday afternoon.
Yes, the stoppage disrupted some programming and services after management did not guarantee workers wouldn't be worse off under a new Labor agreement. The other big union at the ABC, the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, which has more than 1,000 members, including many journalists, called off its industrial action planned after ABC management accepted a demand for the union to be involved in the legal drafting of the bargaining agreement.
This is a very serious story, Sean. More than 122,000 people in Australia experienced homelessness on census night, which is a jump of 5.2% from 5 years earlier.
It means 1 in 200 people in Australia were homeless on that night in 2021, which is pretty incredible, really. The Bureau of Statistics survey was taken mid-COVID, which partially explains why there are actually fewer people sleeping rough in improvised dwellings, tents or sleeping out, but many more in accommodation for the homeless, boarding houses and other temporary lodgings. While males still make up the majority of those experiencing homelessness, the number of females jumped around 10% from 5 years earlier. Very, very concerning.
Yeah, really sad. Sean, in international news, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida made a surprise visit to Kyiv overnight Tuesday, Australian time, just as Chinese President Xi Jinping was meeting in Moscow with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Now, I know this is a very Anglo thing to say, but I think some of the names in this story are just fantastic. Fumio Kishida, is that not the best named leader in the world?
It is very good. It does worry me when you introduce something by saying, I know this is going to be a very Anglo thing to say. I just have no idea where you're going to go with that. But yes, Fumio Kishida is a fantastic name.
Even Xi Jinping, I think, is a pretty cool name to say.
Yes, that is true.
I mean, compare that to Anthony Albanese.
What about Joe Biden? Yeah, they're all fairly kind of...
Joe Biden. Like Boris Johnson was good. Like Boris, I think that was a cool...
Well, it all comes down to whether you can abbreviate it well. I mean, Bojo and Joe Biden.
I'm pleased you said Bojo on that. Anyway, let's move on. We've got dueling diplomacy between the two most economically powerful Asian nations at the moment. Kishida and Xi were less than 1,000 kilometres apart. Kishida is the last of the G7 leaders to visit Ukraine and meet President Volodymyr Zelensky, another cracking name. The Japanese Prime Minister paid tribute to those killed in Bucha, a town that has become a symbol of Russian atrocities against civilians. Meanwhile, Xi promoted Beijing's peace proposal for Ukraine. Of course, that's a proposal that Western nations have totally dismissed.
And finally, Sean, Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates says OpenAI's language generation artificial intelligence tools is one of the biggest technology jumps he's seen in his lifetime.
Gates says the promise of the new technology is the, and I quote, most important advance in technology since the graphical user interface. Of course, that allows people to more easily interact with computers by using icons, menus in Windows, and sets the standard for modern operating systems. In his Gates Notes blog, he says the development of AI is as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, and the mobile phone. It will change the way people work, learn, travel, get healthcare, and communicate with each other. Entire industries will reorient around it. Businesses will distinguish themselves by how well they use it. Now, of course, OpenAI is backed by Microsoft. They put $10 billion into it. Still, enormous praise.
That is quite significant still. Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. Your guest today is John Stensholt, editor of The List, Australia's Richest 250.
Yes, all about the richest Australians, those iron ore magnates and the tech guys and manufacturing, the rise and rise of manufacturing, in fact. Fascinating chat. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, always good to talk to John about how he goes when he makes a phone call to say, hey, we reckon you're worth $20 billion, and the sort of response he gets.
Yeah, it's a great chat, Sean. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Sean, just very quickly, do you remember earlier in the week how I said I thought we'd found our most enthusiastic advocate of fear and greed? So basically anyone who kind of spreads the word.
Yes.
We rely on word of mouth to kind of grow fear and greed. Anyway, it didn't take long. I reckon we found another competitor for the title of most enthusiastic advocate, which we actually need to make a more kind of snazzy kind of title.
Who's that?
His name is Grant Johnson out of regional Victoria, and he is a big supporter of Fear and Greed, a very enthusiastic listener, and is willing to tell a lot of people about us. So thank you very much, Grant, for that. And you really kind of put the challenge out there now. I think you've thrown down the gauntlet.
We find the biggest Mia, most enthusiastic
advocate.
Yes, I lost it there for a moment.
I don't know how effective Mia is going to be.
I don't think it's going to fly.
Because it takes as much explaining as it did, and you actually lost your train of thought in the middle of the explanation. I don't think it's going to catch on. But at the moment, the front runner is Grant Johnson. So thank you very much, Grant, for your support. And that pretty much wraps us up, Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 23rd of March, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't forget there's a new episode as well out of How Do They Afford That, our sister podcast, really this week looking at whether it is ever too late to start paying attention to your finances. And of course, the answer is no. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.